My name is Alan, and welcome to the Sound Speeds Podcast, Episode 9, Popeyes, You Still Fail Us. Back in August, when you released a chicken sandwich that you claim is better than Chick-fil-A's, you were not somehow expecting people to come in mass numbers, expecting to get a sample. And then people waited in line for 2 or 3 hours, even in the drive-thru, only to get up to the window and be told, sorry, we're out of them. That's unacceptable, especially when you don't even bother putting it on the windows, which eventually, in fairness, you did do. But I spent quite a bit of time trying to find one, and I was unable to. The best chance I had was one day when I showed up at a Popeyes, stood in the line, and this is after finding a parking space, I might add. And luckily, the conversation that I was having with the guy next to me happened to work in a government building, which I happened to shoot a TV show pilot in about 4 or 5 years ago. He and I had a great conversation because we were working on the same exact show. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was probably actually working with this guy because he was working with the locations department as one of the site reps. So it was kind of cool sharing stories from their end and our end. And that was the reason why I stood in line for just over 2 hours before having to say, well, you know what? I haven't even gotten up the window just yet, but I have to leave to go to work because I had a 5 p.m. call time. Now, that is just one of the many times I tried to get a chicken sandwich, and it became an adventure and even a quest after a while. I thought it would be kind of fun. The Chick-fil-A sandwich has continued to be one that you can just go right up, get it, and with my pleasure, you are off and along your merry way with a chicken sandwich. Now, Popeyes, on the other hand, has announced recently that as of last Sunday, they were going to be back in stores. Now, I decided to give it a few days and let hopefully the hype die back down, but it hasn't just yet. On my way home from work tonight, we wrapped at 11 p.m. and I was out of there. I go and get in a Popeyes line. Now, it was not extremely long, and I had a wonderful audiobook I was listening to, and after 35 minutes, I got up to the window, only to see that everything was dark. They were still open, though, and there was a faint sign that I could barely see with my eyes that said, "Sorry, out of chicken sandwiches. Sorry for the convenience." So I asked the guy when he comes on, welcome to Popeyes or whatever in the world. I said, are you really out of chicken sandwiches? He said, yes, sir. And I'm like, okay, at least if you would put it back on the door, that would be great. That way we don't get all the way through the line only to realize that you're out of them. He's like, okay, will that be all? I'm like, really, dude? So I was pretty frustrated, and I drove home pretty agitated, looking to just burn a new hole in Popeyes when I got on this podcast. But then I saw a box waiting for me from Rode, and inside of it was the Rode NTG5. Now, that's what I'm going to be using in this particular video, speaking into it right here. I'm not reviewing it just yet, but when I do, I will put a link to that right up in there. So if the link is working, then watch my review. But regardless, it is Saturday, November 9th, I think, 2019. Let's get into it. Amazon impulse buys. One of the things that we are stuck doing in the film industry is working in whatever environment that production happens to put us in. Sometimes they're less than ideal circumstances. Sometimes they are just fine. But one of the things that's really irritating is exterior day scenes, especially when it is extremely hot or extremely cold. Most of the time, for me, though, it's when it's hot. In Atlanta, it's fairly humid, and it is at least in the mid-90s, if not higher, especially by the time you factor in the humidity and the feels like and all that kind of stuff. It's well over 100. This is in the summer. Sweat does not happen to drain off of you very well, and that which does gets caught up in your clothing. It doesn't wick away unless you're wearing wicking clothes. And because it's so hot, you just get plastered in sweat. Unless you have wicking clothes. And I'm going to continue to mention the wicking clothes because a few years ago I was introduced to them by a company called Under Armour. But one of the things I realized is you can spend $30 or $35 on a shirt, but as soon as you do, you're going to snag it on a nail or something like that. It's going to render the thing completely useless. But you buy a $5 or $6 off-brand, like I got the Hanes Cool Dry, I think it's called, and it was about $6, and every one of those shirts I bought about 3 years ago and rotate through is working like a champ still. However, I don't like to wear a lot of clothes that are not wicking as soon as I discovered the wicking technology. The reason why is because if you sweat a lot like I do, then you will naturally wick it away and it absorbs into the clothing, thereby cooling you. Now, this has become to be something that I've enjoyed quite a bit. Now, a lot of people will wear these wicking shirts underneath another shirt, or they'll just wear a wicking shirt on top. But one of the things I learned is that because I sweat a lot, which, by the way, you do have to hydrate yourself quite a bit if you sweat a lot in the summer heat, then it's one of those things that you have to plan on in advance if you want to keep your skin out of the sun. Now, I usually like to wear a wicking short sleeve shirt, but when I do day exteriors, I cover up my skin. And one of the things that I've done in the past is I've worn a long sleeve shirt that wicks. And that's fine if you're outdoors all day long. But when you are indoors, sometimes, then you end up having to roll them up. And when you scrunch them up, then it starts to get kind of on your nerves because you are trying to keep yourself cool and don't want to have these long sleeves on indoors. And then I found something that I like a lot. That is this thing right here. It is a wicking hoodie. Believe it or not, they do make such a thing. It is a hoodie that you can wear, and it wicks away. It's SPF 50. It's professional fishing gear, if you see the PFG right there. But this right here is a lightweight SPF 50, wicks away, and because it's black, it actually absorbs, obviously the heat a little bit, but because it wicks away so well, it actually cools, and it keeps me cooler. Now, it sounds like voodoo, I know, but it does work. And I'm sure that if I wore a white one, it would probably work just fine too. But what I can do is wear a short sleeve shirt. When I'm doing exteriors, I can put this on. Because it has a hood on it, I can put something underneath, that also that keeps the sun off of my face, along with my sunglasses, and it doesn't get on the back of my neck. I have, over the past few years, gone through various different versions trying to keep the sun off of my neck, off of my face, all kinds of different versions. And on Walking Dead, every single day for a season and a half that I was there, the second half of season 7 and all of season 8, it was one of those things where I was really dialing in. And now, because of this hoodie, I think I've gotten it. Because if I don't want to wear this hoodie after we go inside, I can take it off and I'm just in my short sleeve wicking version. So this right here is pretty awesome. Now, I'm going to add one more thing if you work in the film industry. Columbia, which makes this professional PFG thing, hoodie, I'm going to show you this right here. It says Columbia right here. Columbia actually has, I forgot what they call it, a purchasing program or something like that, that if you work in the film industry, you qualify for discounts. I'll put the link down in the description along with what you're reading on the screen right now if you want to look at it for you to check out. But if you're interested in one of these hoodies, then definitely get it on Amazon. I have some affiliate links down in the description. And I encourage you to get one of these because keeping the sun off of you is a great thing, especially because you don't have to use sunscreen and smother your skin with that. So it's a good thing. Something sound. One of the things that people have been observing on this podcast is that after the first couple of episodes, I stopped using the windscreen on the SM7B. And people were like, why are you doing that? It's naked. Well, because you don't really need to if you use the microphone correctly. And this is not a all the time thing. I mean, I do see pictures of people that have an open shotgun microphone like this one, and then they don't put any kind of a wind protection on that, and they're in an environment where they're gently swinging it around or something like that. I understand if you're in a controlled environment with doors closed, AC is not on, or at least it's not blowing on your microphone, and you keep it right over top of someone's face that you're doing an interview in an ENG type situation. I understand that. But what I don't understand is people that will take a shotgun like this outside without any wind protection on it at all. That is foolish because there could be a gust of wind or something like that that comes up and decides to blow the microphone, and you are in trouble at that point because your microphone's going to basically go, oh no, that's not acceptable at all if you're recording professional dialogue. So one of the things I thought I would cover in this podcast is when is it, I'll get the words out eventually, acceptable to not use a windscreen. If you are in an absolutely controlled environment where there is no wind blowing, the air is stagnant, and you can feel that on your skin. If the air feels like there's pressure on it, on your skin, then chances are you want to use some sort of wind protection, especially if you're cueing the microphone back and forth. If the air feels like it's just not moving, it almost feels dead against your skin, that's one of those indicators that you could probably get away with not using it, unless they are keeping fans around to blow onto talent and to keep the air circulating. In that case, then you want to avoid the wind noise just blasting your microphone. That's going to drive everyone listening to Comtex or IFBs or anything like that, along with your mixer and your utility and boom op, whoever you happen to have. Everyone's going to be driven crazy by that, and you don't want to do that. If you move your hand around too much, you will also cause wind on a microphone such as this. So you got to be careful. But what you do trade off in by not having a wind protection is that you get a little bit more highs. And that's the reason why I really like that on the SM7B. And that's the reason why after, the second podcast, something like that, I decided to not use it and to do it as a test. Then after that, going forward, I thought it was going to be a great thing, and I have continued it because I like the way it represents the higher frequencies even better without it on there. Now the Rode NTG5 here, I'm also not using the windscreen on that because this environment is controlled. And I'm not going straight down the barrel on this. If I go straight in and then start talking, then you're hearing all the wind coming off of my mouth. You're hearing it all coming out of my nose. If I go, you're going to hear all that. But what I'm doing is I'm off axis. I do have a video about this if you'd like to watch this video up here because it is a SoundSpeeds video. But I'm going to at least cover some of the basics right here for you. This microphone is in a controlled environment, and because I can control all aspects of it, as long as I don't talk directly into it, and what I'm basically doing is if I were to blow a small bubble with chewing gum in my mouth, this microphone is pointed directly at it. So coming straight out of the microphone into the edge of my mouth right now. My breath is going this way, and it's not going into that microphone. And because it's not, I can get away with not using windscreen because of this environment. But if I go outside, you definitely want to prepare for at least light wind. If you start to detect any wind at all, or if you see on the call sheet that it's supposed to have some wind and you checked it on your weather app or whatever, and it says, it's no longer like 2 or 3 degree mile-an-hour winds, then you definitely want to put at least light wind protection on there, and that's going to really help you tremendously. Now, you don't want to use it if you don't have to, especially something like the high wind cover that looks like a sock that you could put on a Zeppelin. You could use a Zeppelin with fur, or Zeppelin with fur and a high wind cover, and even the foamy on the microphone. Whatever you want to do, don't do all that because it's overkill. If it's a light breeze outside, start with just a Zeppelin, and hopefully you're plugging in your microphone and letting it sit in the up position, in the on position, and you're listening to it while you're on set, watching the lighting and the setup. So if you're doing all that and doing your job as a boom operator, and of course I'm assuming you're a boom operator, then you're not going to have any issues at all detecting any wind on there, and then you could take it up a notch. Say, okay, I do need the high wind cover, the Rycote HWC, for example. Or if you're in the world of Sonella, then you might say, well, I have a Cozy. I'm going to try a Cozy if your microphone will fit it. Or you might say, it's time to upgrade to something like a Cyclone or a Pianissimo or whatever you have available, and then add fur if you need to on top of that because it's gusting. Or if you want to prepare for something like the wind that would be at the beach, definitely you want to prepare for wind in that kind of an environment because it is so. It's quite a possibility. Another thing to consider is even if you think that you could be okay, if your director does not ever like to cut. If they say reset back to 1, reset back to 1, reset back to 1, reset back to 1, great, moving on, you might want to prepare on at least having some wind protection on your microphone, even if it is completely stagnant air outside. Or if you're inside and the door occasionally opens and closes and you might get a little gust every now and then, at least put something like a light foam windscreen on there. It's going to be very, very beneficial to you to do that exact thing. But in a controlled environment, just ask yourself, is this environment controlled? Do I expect wind to hit it unless it's like me, not using proper mic technique or something? If you are expecting to blow on the microphone because you don't know how to control it, or if you're expecting someone to hit the microphone with some of their breath because they're going, I can't believe this, something like that, if they're overacting or whatever they're doing. In that case, then you might want to prepare for at least some. But your fidelity on your microphone is going to be much higher if you don't have to use a windscreen. So there you go. Opinionated much? One of the things that we do not do this day and age is shame people because they are overweight, fat shaming, or because they are gay, let's say, gay shaming, or gender preference shaming or something like that. Shaming is not something that is acceptable in society, especially in 2019. Now, granted, if you watch movies back in the 80s, people were shaming people for all over there. Those the fat kid in school, make fun of him. Ha 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 ha. Oh, that kid's a nerd. Ha 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 ha. Make fun of him. Well, people now know that the nerds are going to grow up and become multi-billionaires because they're doing stuff with computers. And people don't no longer make fun of people because of their sexual preference. Now, I'm not going to get all political in that, but I am going to say this. One thing that seems to me to be quite primitive is the politics shaming. Does not matter what the topic is. People are like, oh, don't shame that person. They're a protected class because they're male, because they're female, because they're black, because they're Asian, because they're whatever. Don't make fun of people based on the way they look, based on their ethnicity, their gender, any of that kind of stuff is all completely unacceptable. And it's even protected by law in the workforce. But what is not is politics. Now, people will make fun of people with religion the same exact way, even though we have a freedom of religion and you're not allowed to mention it in the workforce. But one thing that's very interesting is that we have, in addition to religious shaming, I guess you could say, we also have politics shaming, where people that I've seen on Facebook will say, if you do not share my opinion, I'm going to delete your profile. I'm going to completely remove you as a friend because you're not worth it if you don't believe in me. Are we really going to go there? We're going to go into politics shaming. People this day and age are so immature that because you don't agree with them, you're going to completely remove them as a friend. I have professional work colleagues and people who I've worked with in the sound world, people I've trained that have put on their Facebook, if you do not believe what I believe, I'm going to remove you as a friend. Well, some people are going to say, you know what, fine, that's fine, bye. I had one person remove me as a friend because they didn't believe in something I said when they said, change my mind. They did one of these, political posts and they said, change my mind. I threw out one little comment and they instantly get really, really annoyed and then they delete me as a friend or remove me as a friend. Well, about a year and a half later, I guess you could say, the person tried adding me back as a friend. And I've sat there with them, just not accepting it. I just leave them there just because I think it's funny. I'll accept a lot of other people, but I just find it funny to leave him right there. And he'll remove his request every now and then resend it as if getting a new notification is going to suddenly make me say, oh, you know what? I definitely need to accept you now. But that's not the way I work. If you remove me because you're a child, I have no motivation to add you back on there. And I do even have relatives that have done this to me. And I take a very much no mercy attitude because I don't think that someone removing you because you don't agree with them should be adding you back only because you're going to annoy them again because they don't agree with you. So if you happen to be someone that thinks that people are great and you love everybody or whatever, and then if someone doesn't agree with you politically, you're going to defriend them or suddenly think that they're a bad person and remove them from your social media, really? You're going to politics shame someone? There's people I know that I donate to charities, that know that I train a lot of people, that I don't do a lot of things for recognition, for money, for whatever else. I do things because I think it's the right thing to do. There are, believe it or not, 17 people on my phone service. And I only have my wife, me, and 2 daughters that are on there. All the other 13 people, those people are people that were either friends that didn't have the money to continue their phone service, that we want them to have phones because they are, they don't really have an income or they have some sort of an issue where they can't afford one, but we think for their safety they should because they're out and about, or because they need one for work. Or because there's a whole bunch of circumstances. But my phone bill is outrageously huge. But luckily, we happen to be in with our cell phone provider at an early enough time that they only charge us another $25 to add another line at this point because we have so many with them. And they definitely like us, even though our bill's outrageous, especially whenever we have to get a new phone for someone and we have those charges too. Luckily, we have paid off all of them as of now, so the phone bill, I won't tell you what it is, but I'll just say it's very, very high. My point is not to try to get any kind of credit or anything for saying this. My point is People do things out of the goodness of their own heart. And people do things not for recognition, but because they seem to think that the world is a better place if you just open your heart and do something nice for someone. Yet some people out there feel the need that because they openly challenge anyone to disagree with them, and then you happen to throw out one or two little things that say that you disagree, then they want to attack you and say that you're not a good person, that I can't believe that you would be this kind of way, and you must be an evil person for not believing in the same things I believe in. Really? You're going to religious shame someone? I don't buy that at all. I don't buy into that. If you want to be that way, that's fine. You know what? I'm not going to hold a grudge and think you're just, evil or whatever because you decided to politics shame me. I'm going to feel sorry for you because I think that's more the right thing to do. But I encourage you to, if you do politics shame people, don't. Grow up. Wrong answers only. One of the questions I'm occasionally asked is, how important is hydration and sleep to a boom operator? Well, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, you want to be well rested because if you're not going to have the energy enough to boom all day on a 12-plus hour day because it's a very active position. You got to constantly think. Thinking requires hydration, and therefore you have to hydrate yourself in order to stay going. I know some people that have one bottle of water every now and then, but don't bother to keep themselves hydrated. And believe it or not, your brain needs more than that in order for you to be thinking through things like, where am I going to properly plant a microphone? What kind of microphone is that going to be? What pattern should that microphone be? And there's a lot of things that you need to consider as a boom operator. And I can simplify that for you very easily into saying that as a boom operator, one of the things you want to do when you are booming indoors is consider something more along the lines of a super or a hypercardioid pattern microphone. The reason why is you usually need a little bit more reach, and you don't have the luxury of putting the boom right on the frame line or rather right on the top of someone's head because people are now their DPs are choosing cameras that have not just an overscan, but they're having an extra area so that way they can resize the frame and they're protecting that area. So, and maybe it's for visual effects or whatever, and it's really annoying. But one of the things that you constantly run into is not being able to put the boom right on the frame line anymore. And I understand that there's a whole mentality of, if you're using a supercardioid pattern microphone, then you don't want to do that anyway because it could push the proximity effect of the microphone depending on which one you use. But if you're using something and you need to push it because of noise or whatever, you want to have that luxury too. Now, a cardioid pattern microphone is something that you would use when it's a little bit, you have people a little bit more spread out and you need to play a little bit more of those. Like, for example, if I'm talking to someone that's about 2 feet in front of me and we're about 2 feet, framed, then that's one thing. But as soon as they do something like, okay, now we're going to go over and I need you to scoot back now 6 feet and just play the edge of someone, and the rest of that is, 6 feet of gap, you're no longer able to swing that as effectively and easily. And if you know they're going to be doing that in advance, you might consider doing something like maybe a supercardioid pattern microphone and cueing away and try to pull that in if you don't have an option to second boom. Or you might find, depending on the pacing, it easier to use a cardioid pattern microphone because it's a little bit wider. On tables, I will actually resort to a cardioid pattern microphone pretty quickly and efficiently simply because I don't want to get as much play and reverb off the table, which happens with something like a hyper or supercardioid. So one of the things that I will tell you right now is that patterns are very important when you consider them. Now, there's two basic forms of pattern that you run into on a capsule. And at least the way that microphones used to be, if they were multi-pattern, then they usually had one capsule that was dedicated to an omnidirectional pattern. The other one was a binaural, which means it was basically a figure of 8 pattern. So the microphone goes this way and it pulls some sound in from the left and some sound in from the right. But what you run into in that is half of the microphone is picking up in positive phase and the other half is negative phase. Imagine like a plane like this. Sound that comes in this way is going to make this diaphragm go this way first, and that creates the positive crest of a sound wave. And then as the diaphragm snaps back and bounces back the other way, it's creating the trough. Well, sound that comes in from the negative side is going to do the exact opposite. It's going to go into a trough, then a crest. So you can have cancellation between things and sounds that come in from the left or right on that on a binaural microphone. But if you overlay those two patterns together evenly, an omnidirectional microphone and a binaural, then what you end up running into is the positive globe of the binaural will actually extend the reach of that microphone in that direction, while the negative globe will phase cancel out some of the omnidirectional pattern, creating a cardioid pattern. Now, depending on either if it's physical or if it's electronic, by manipulating the amount of the positive globe versus the negative globe, like instead of it being 50-50, if you have maybe 65% on the positive globe and maybe 35% on the negative globe, that is not going to cancel out as much on the omnidirectional pattern, but it will give you even more reach out the front of the pattern of the microphone. Doing that will create something more along the lines of a hyper or a supercardioid pattern, depending on how much that percentage is. And there's formulas online if you are interested. You can see at what point it's considered to be a wide enough to be a hyper or direct enough to be a hyper or a super or whatever that happens to be. But that's one of the ways that they manipulate electronically the patterns in order to create all the other patterns. Now, omnidirectional patterns can still be used for things like you can use a Peter Ing Omnigoose inside of a car using one plant up in the ceiling to pull in everybody around you, and that's going to be great. There's also no real proximity effect that you run into with an omnidirectional pattern microphone, and they really come in handy if you're doing any kind of gunshot work, because you can just put it in an omnidirectional pattern, get it right up next to, depending on the microphone you're using, right up on set next to the gun. Hear it trail off. Don't use the dynamic for those things. Use a high SPL ability microphone, something along the lines of like what I use, an AKG C4000B. So that should answer the question. And I appreciate you staying with me and listening. Story time. I'm going to start the quotes right now because I'm not being offensive. I'm simply saying right now, I happen to have a yard Mexican. Now, don't be offended again, because I'm going to explain how I'm able to say that without it being offensive. Interested? Well, let me back up a little bit. When I was younger, I hated doing yard work. I mean, I still hate doing yard work. I'm not one of those people that enjoys being out in nature. I think I was probably about 6 when I determined I didn't like doing yard work, something like that. But unfortunately, as I got older, I did not have the income to hire someone to do yard work for me until after I got to a certain income level. And then at that point, I talked to my wife and said, you know what, can we get someone else to do all the yard work? That'd be really awesome. And she's like, you know what, we can now. So it was one thing that we started doing. Now, where do we hire a person to do our yard? My wife is at the gas station around the corner, happens to see a guy with pickup truck, a trailer behind that, filled with yard gear, lawnmowers and edgers and that kind of stuff, and then sees his phone number on the side door of his truck. She goes over and greets him, and it very quickly realized that he's Hispanic and he doesn't speak very good English. But what she was able to get out of the conversation is that he was available after a couple of hours to come over to the house. So he came over to the house, and this is after discussing, that he would come out there for, I think, $30 at the time, $30 to do, all the mowing and edging and stuff like that is what my wife kind of was able to figure out, the whole yard, and pointing at certain things and, see. So he comes out, he does a really good job. And at the end, my wife was trying to figure out what to call him because she wanted to add him to her phone, and said, what's your name? Well, he didn't say Miguel or whatever his name was. I don't even know if we ever found out what that was because we always paid him in cash. And my wife always tipped him also, which after a while, anybody that we've had to our yard since, we've always tipped. I mean, they say our price is $30, we always give them more. Then after a while, they always start, billing us or putting on the receipt. Like our current guy, he speaks, decent English. He's Hispanic also. But he actually gives us, he just comes, he does it on a schedule, exactly as we say. He puts it on a little note and sticks it to our front door. And then my wife simply goes in and Venmos or PayPals him the money. It's pretty awesome. But this particular guy, the very first guy we had, and I've stepped away because I wanted to give it a little bit of time because it is really funny. She asked him, I want to put your name in my phone. What do I call you? He kind of thought about it for a second and then said, Yard Mexican. So because he referred to himself as Yard Mexican, we really didn't have a choice but to call him Yard Mexican. So we started to say, when's Yard Mexican coming? That's what he told us his name was. So that's what we started doing. And people would be like, you can't say that. It's like, he called himself that. I mean, what else are we going to call him? I mean, we can't just say our yard guy. He referred to himself as Yard Mexican. I mean, obviously we don't, I don't go to set and start saying, yo, my Yard Mexican came. You obviously don't do that kind of thing, but around family or friends or something like that and say, we got to pay him. We got to get some cash. I can stop by on my way home and get some money. Sure, that's fine. Oh yeah, you need some cash? Well, don't need it. I just got to go by and get some for the Yard Mexican. Whoa. Yard Mexican? You can't say that. I mean, obviously, I'm telling you this now because it's very interesting that he wanted to be called that in our phone. Now, I don't know if he's protecting his name or whatever. He doesn't want to pull attention to the fact that he's Hispanic, maybe illegally. I don't know the details. I don't pretend to. All I do know is after a certain amount of time, he didn't tell us that he was not going to come anymore. He just simply told another one of his friends he could take over the job, and he started coming over instead. He actually did have a name. But anyway, our first yard guy was called Yard Mexican. Floating. I see a lot of people on social media and on my Facebook and whatever freaking out every time they see a still shot from a movie or a TV show, and they think that it's from like a screen capture from the movie or TV show. Game of Thrones was a big one. People were saying, I saw Cersei, there was a hand that Jaime Lannister puts his hand around Cersei and his hand was real. I saw that. That's a mistake in the TV show. No, it's not. Let me explain why. One of the things that we do on set is we make a TV show or a movie. But there's also someone there from the stills department. The stills department person, which is a stills photographer, his or her job is to take pictures on set that are going to be used to promote and market the show. Now, those pictures that the stills person takes do not go to the VFX department that makes the TV show itself. It goes to marketing, to advertising, to wherever else they need to take it to, but it's a completely different department. And because of that, sometimes the stills you see on television or in an article that you see on Facebook or whatever, that is a photograph that was indeed taken when they were shooting the TV show, but it is not a still from the actual show itself. It could have been a rehearsal. And like in the case of Game of Thrones, Jaime Lannister has his hand around Cersei, and people say, I see that hand. He actually has a fake hand on the show. And I watch it. Well, you watch the actual TV show and you'll see that his hand is the VFX, fake hand that he used on the show. And then people are saying, okay, well, that's definitely a coffee cup. Well, it was a coffee cup in Game of Thrones. Fix that. And I did very first podcast test actually all about that and how that happens. Watch that video right there if you have not already. And I explain how that could come to be. Now, the reason I'm mentioning all this is because you see a lot of promotional stills, as they're referred to, from people that are taking them on TV shows that they're working. And those, again, are used for promotional reasons and purposes. But those are not those taken through VFX or whatever. So if you're watching a behind-the-scenes shot from something like The Matrix and you see a green screen in the back, you obviously look at that and say, oh, that's green screen. Obviously, I recognize that they're making a TV show or in this case, a movie. And if you see green screen, that's an indicator that it's not the actual show, right? But then people do not happen to think about the fact that the stills photographs that they see in advertisements for a movie or a TV show are not also taken through VFX or whatever. Now, sometimes if you see one of those images that looks like it was the final shot from the show, chances are it was the screen capture. And they did something like that. But the stills photographer shots that you see online sometimes promoting a TV show, they will have something that seems a little out of place. Maybe their makeup does not look exactly right. Their hair is not perfect. The actors are standing around looking kind of lax, like they weren't in the scene. Or somebody might be holding a drink or holding a thermos or not carrying their sword or whatever the case may be. Well, you're not seeing a continuity error. Most likely. Chances are what you're seeing is the stills photographer taking a picture during a rehearsal or during while the director's talking to everybody on a reset or something like that, they're sneaking one, because some actors have an issue with a stills photographer being in their eye line. And that means I'm looking right now at you, and if there was someone standing behind the camera, they would be in my eye line because I can see them while I'm performing. And that's the way some stills people are. It doesn't matter that you have a camera operator, a first AC, second AC, dolly grip, boom operator, first AD, everybody else can be in their eye line, but a stills person somehow throws off some actors. I don't get it, but then I'm not an actor. But these still people have a difficult job, and sometimes if they can't get on set to take pictures, they'll sometimes see if they can sneak on there to get a rehearsal. Some actors let people get away with that because the cameras are not rolling. As soon as they're rolling, you're in my eye line, I can't have you there. And in this circumstance, sometimes they have to get those stills during resets. A reset back to 1, take a couple of pictures real quick, and then get out of the actor's eye line again before the director says action again. In those circumstances, they may be taking some of the pictures that make it into the promotions for the show. So anytime you see a stills photograph, don't just assume that it's a screen capture from the show because you're seeing some sort of an error, especially if it's VFX related, because it's probably not. It's probably just the stills photographer doing their job and taking a photo that's used for promotion. So there you have it. Another episode of the SoundSpeeds podcast in the can using the Rode NTG5 microphone. I'm not going to tell you my thoughts on that. You're going to have to wait for my review, but it should be in the description below as soon as I release it. And there's probably a card that I put up earlier in this video as well. If you have any questions you would like to submit for me to answer for any of the segments on the show, please send me an email at soundspeedspodcast@yahoo.com. Or if you would like to submit an outro voiceover to do my outro, then that is also an option. And on that note, Martin Seville supplied the voiceover for this episode of the SoundSpeeds podcast. So take us away, Martin. Oh, but real quick, Epstein didn't kill himself.
If you'd like to ask a question for the Wrong Answers Only segment or submit a suggestion for the floating segment, send an email to soundspeedspodcast@yahoo.com. If you'd like to showcase your voiceover talents by saying this outro, make sure it sounds good, doesn't exceed 20 seconds, and send it to the same email. Hit subscribe for more content both here and on SoundSpeeds.